Why don't we just take a few minutes here and let Jake and Josh walk folks through our new school grade site. You ladies can stay up here if you want. They're going to talk about the site and show you a little bit and just discuss some of the takeaways here for a minute. And then, again, we're going to have some time for questions and answers in a few minutes. And if you're watching via live stream, you can tweet them to @SchoolGradesUSA or #SchoolGrades. Okay.
Great. Well, so this is SchoolGrace.org. So you open up this home page, and what you see are a couple of search boxes. So what we're going to take you through is a hypothetical situation. So imagine that you are a parent, and you're living in the upper part of Manhattan. Let's say that you live somewhere right around 145th Street in New York. You enter your address, and you hit go, and in a matter of seconds, you pull up a map.
Using an AT&T hotspot.
Right. Yes. So the map is going to show you color-coded dots that represent the schools that are within 10 miles of the address that you put in. Now, notice one of the things to note here, there's lots of multicolored dots on the map in both New York and New Jersey. So this is one feature of the site that we are using a common methodology to overcome the fact that New York and New Jersey are two states that administer different tests. So this might be, if you're up there in Upper Manhattan, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm not going to drive out to Hackensack to take my kid to school. So you might want to reduce your search radius a little bit, which we can do. So say that you want to keep it within 5 miles, you change that information, and that's going to zoom us in a little bit so we can actually see, we still get a couple of the New Jersey schools in there, but you look around, you're getting a lot of the public schools in the upper part of Manhattan and into the Bronx there. And you can see that there are dots of all colors there. So the color coding, there's a key there on the right-hand side. The green dots represent schools that we give the grade of A. So A schools in our system are schools that perform on a level that puts them up there with the top public schools in the world. So if you think about public education in countries like South Korea and Finland that get written up in the education press all the time, A schools are schools that perform at that level. A C school, which is sort of the light blue dot, is performing at about the level of the United States average. The F schools are ones that are performing well below the US average. So you're a parent and you see that there are all these schools around here, and so let's say you want to get some more information about one of these schools. So let's pick out so KIPP Infinity Charter School, not too far away, gets a grade of A. We can go to the school detail page for that school, and you get some of the basic background information on the school right up front. We see some statistics there that sort of underlie where the grade comes from. If you were to scroll down on this page, every school detail page is going to give you a lot of information about the entire methodology. So if you're the wonky kind of parent who likes to know where all these things come from, all the information is there that walks you from the process of starting with state assessments. So, New York State tests for this school give a 59% and 30% proficiency in math and reading. We're going to convert that to the NAEP standard, National Assessment of Education Progress, which puts it on the equal footing with schools in all other states in the U.S. And then the thing that we do, the next step in the process is to say, we're going to adjust this performance rating based on the characteristics of the students that are served by this school. Now, this KIPP charter school that we're looking for is one where 92% of students qualify for the federal free and reduced lunch program. That compares to a national average that's closer to 50%. So this is a school serving a very disadvantaged population. So we're going to actually adjust the 48% that we came up with for their proficiency and say, if we were to imagine the school serving a population that was closer to the national average, this is about where we'd expect them to be, about 57. 57 is enough to qualify them for an A. So if we go back up to the top of the page there, now you'll see here something that we've just, functionality that we've just added, reflecting a partnership that we have with Great Schools. The Great Schools rating appears here as well. You want more information about this school, you want to know the parent ratings and all the other information out there, there's a direct link to the school detail page at Great Schools for the same school. Now, I will point out that Great Schools gives this school a 6 out of 10, and we give it an A. And so the difference in the ratings that you see there, it's the same data underlying, same test score data that underlie those ratings, but the fact that school grades is taking account for the fact that New York has fairly stringent state standards compared to other states, and the fact that this particular school serves a highly disadvantaged population. That helps us understand why a school performing at this level should actually be considered a remarkable school that's performing on par with the best public schools in the world.
And you can actually see on their community rating that it's a 5-star school on their community rating. So parents understand that this is a great school.
Yes. So if we go back to school grades, so one more, we showed you in the initial map up there that the ratings go beyond state lines. I mean, one of the really interesting things that you learn from just poring over, there's information out there for about 70,000 public schools nationwide. One of the takeaway messages that we learned from looking at the data like this is that a place like New York City actually has some of the best public schools in the United States. So the old story that you hear about American cities is that young couples live in the city, but then when they have kids, they move to the suburbs because the schools are better there. We found that the top schools in New York State almost exclusively are in New York City. They are the top performing schools in all of New York State, and they are among the top performing schools in the entire country and in the world. And this is what's sort of disguising this fact is that New York City's public schools serve a disadvantaged population. And that makes it look like they're performing a little bit lower, but it's just reflecting the characteristics of the students that they serve. The students that they serve receive a very good education in New York City. And looking at the data that we have in the way that we do enables us to observe that. So Josh is scrolling down now. In addition to showing these schools on a map, we also have the functionality to just scroll through the listings that you pull up when you do a search. And these are organized in a way to put the best performing schools at the top of the list. And you can see here that Josh's little pointer there is going over these designations that we have for the very best performing schools. We call them All-American schools, gold, silver, and bronze. These are schools that not only earn the grade of A, but they perform well beyond the threshold for earning an A. To be really, these are designations that we reserve for, say, the top 3 or 4% of American public schools. And the All-American designation is calling out schools that earn these honors, but also serve a population that is at least as disadvantaged as the national average. So the Harlem Success Academy is an example of one of the schools that we give our highest accolades for. It's a gold school, meaning that its performance puts it well within the top 1% of the 70,000 schools we work with nationwide. And it also serves a highly disadvantaged population. You can see 86% of the students in this school are in the free and reduced lunch program. So we'll do one more little thing for you here. So suppose that you didn't quite get the message that New York City has the best schools in New York State, and you wanted to head out for the suburbs. Of course, New York's suburbs span a growing number of states. So suppose that you were going to move to the New York area, and you had heard about this town called Greenwich, Connecticut, and you thought that maybe that would be a good place to raise your family. But suppose that you only had maybe like $500,000 to spend on a house. You quickly learn that $500,000 in Greenwich gets you nothing. So you start thinking, well, I'd like being on the train line to get into Grand Central. So maybe there are some other locations that are close to Greenwich, but I just want to make sure that the schools are good for my kids. Now, there's this inconvenient fact that Greenwich is right on the state boundary there. So how do you compare the schools in, say, Port Chester, which is much more affordable than Greenwich, with the schools in Stamford? Well, this particular resource enables you to do that. And so you can see that even in Greenwich, not all the schools are perfect. But you see that if you look a little further upfield up in Stamford, or you come down across the New York line in the area around Rye and Harrison, you have some outstanding options in those communities as well. So providing parents who happen to be doing a move to one of these multi-state areas the capacity to assess schools using a common yardstick is another functionality that we think will be helpful. So, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
So that's the basic functionality. You know, there may be a few other bells and whistles here, but we're happy to take questions if anyone would like to ask.
This may have been apparent, I'm not wearing my glasses, but how do you deal with the question of attrition and mobility? Because who's in that denominator and who stays year after year is the key quality feature? Mm-hmm. It looks like a very cool website, by the way.
Thanks. So, you know, in an ideal world, what we would be doing we'd be tracking the growth of students over time. But one of the goals of this site was to come across a methodology that could be applied in every state in the country uniformly, including states that don't measure growth. So what we are doing is we are just looking at the performance of the students who sit for the standardized tests in a given school in a given year. That can change over time. Currently, our site is focusing on the performance of schools that serve grades 3 through 8. So some of the really significant attrition problems, like high school dropout, we would like to expand the scope of what we're doing here to think about rating high schools as well. But there are some additional challenges there. Even something as simple as measuring a graduation rate. I mean, if you know what graduation rate data are like, you know that it's messy. But that's sort of a next frontier for us.
Good morning, David Bloomfield from Brooklyn College. We spent a lot of time this morning talking about nuances in data analysis, misconceptions, and yet we're presented with a SchoolGraceorg, reducing all of this to a black letter A, B, C. Can you really justify, as a matter of academic integrity, reducing an entire school, a changeable environment for different types of children to a single grade? And aren't you kind of falling into a trap of marketability that really undercuts everything we've been talking about this morning?
So, well, thank you for that soul-searching question.
Very existential.
Yes. Okay, here's a pragmatic way to look at it. The demand for this information is there. Okay? Parents want this information. What the research shows is that if you give this information to parents, it influences them. So, and if we don't give them the information the way that we present it to them, it's not going to stop them from using information, okay? So I gave this analogy to someone when I was describing the site. Okay, think about mouse traps, okay? There are some people who might tell you, don't use mouse traps. Just learn to live with the mice, okay? So that might be a message that you would recommend, but you know what? People are going to use mousetraps, and so we're going to try to give people the better mousetrap here. Okay, so that is what we are really trying to do. If I think about the school choice process that I've engaged in as a guy with a PhD who has kids, yeah, it involved more than just looking at a website and seeing what the letter was. Okay. But not every parent makes decisions the way that I do. Not every parent has the time to go and visit a lot of schools. Not every parent has access to the same, you know, we just a year ago made a cross-country move from North Carolina to Seattle, and we had the benefit of a lot of people on the ground in Seattle to tell us their experiences. Not everybody has access to that kind of information base. So I'd like to think that what we're doing is trying to democratize to some extent. There is a message that I think is important, and I think if you look at these web resources in concert, you'll get that message that there is more to life than just the test scores. But parents want to know about the test scores. So,
well, and I think that it's easy to say, can you reduce a school to a single grade? I don't think that would be the claim that we're making at all. I think that we're claiming that we're presenting one piece of information that helps inform parents and policymakers how well kids are performing on the tests that we give. So, you know, it's taking it a little bit far to say, well, you're reducing it to this one piece of information, and parents, it's going to be determinative in choice. No, we're presenting one piece of information that we think is important in choice, and we're trying to present it as well and as saliently as possible. And I think that that's kind of the ultimate aim. The reason to link to great schools is we think that other pieces of information are very important as well. The community rating, the information on the extracurriculars that are provided are very important. That information should add texture to the choice. What we do is try to present this piece of information as well as we can.
Hi, I'm Howard Cusick, Research Vice President of the Manhattan Institute. We're obviously very pleased to be the host for this great new site and pleased to host such a great group of researchers. I'm struck by what you said, Jake, about the great schools within New York City in the city. And I noticed that there were a lot of charter schools, but there were, you know, PS this and that too. So it was a range of schools. Is this something that School Grades is finding consistently around the country? Because on the anniversary of No Child Left Behind, there are a lot of children left behind, and our conversation continues to focus on that as a core national problem. But if this site is identifying high-performing schools in high-poverty areas around the country, that seems like a breakthrough kind of information set. Is that the case?
It's more than just a New York City phenomenon, absolutely. So if you look for the absolute best public school in Pennsylvania, you want to look in Philadelphia. In Missouri, the top public schools are in St. Louis and Kansas City. So if you look throughout the country and ask state by state, where are the top performing public schools in these states, the answer is that by and large, they are in urban environments. These are not the suburban schools in the wealthy areas that are topping the charts here. Why don't they top the charts by some other measures? It's because they're serving a more disadvantaged population. And I think calling attention to some of these success stories and potentially creating an environment where you will steer people towards these schools or ask the principals of their own schools, what are they doing over there that you can bring as a model over here? That is a potential public service that I'm hoping that this site can provide.
Hi, Matt Barnum from the 74. As you probably know, New York City used to give school letter grades to all New York City public schools, and the de Blasio administration got rid of it. They still have a school report card, but they don't wrap up the metrics into a letter grade. And one of the reasons they did that was because there was a lot of bouncing around of the letter grade from year to year. So a school might get an A one year, a C the next year, a B the next year, a D the following year. Do you expect that to be that same phenomenon to happen on the School Grades website, and how can that be addressed, and how can it be a useful tool to parents if that does happen?
Okay, I thank you for that question. So we've done some work to look at how big a deal this would be. So when we did a pilot version of these ratings, we looked at the year-to-year correlation. Okay, and if the year-to-year correlation is low, then you worry, you know, golly, this is just, we're just randomly picking winners and losers here. There's no information content that parents can rely on. The year-to-year correlation that we started with. Now, correlation, I do teach statistics when I'm not. Correlation, the highest it can get is 1. And it can be, if it's 0, it means you're just sort of throwing darts at a dartboard every year. Okay, the correlation that we started with was 0.96, and once we took account of the fact that some of the noisiest, the schools that tended to change the most from one year to the next were schools that didn't test very many students, and so we adjusted the methodology to use a little bit more of a moving average model for schools that are very small, usually in rural areas, and that brought the correlation up to 0.98. So we do not anticipate that much sort of moving around from year to year. I think in a lot of cases, some of these movements in school performance from one year to the next are based on changes in school demographics. And we're accounting for the school demographics, which I think helps us in relative to some other methodologies that you could use.
For many of the state ratings also, it's an issue of changes in calculations about how the districts are calculating these things. It's one of the reasons why there's a benefit to having external entities have consistent measures year over year, because you see this in almost every state. A new administration will change the way that certain ratings are published, so it's very hard for a parent to see over time, because there'll be new ratings, and then ratings will stop, and the ratings will change how they're calculated. So there's a lot of turnover, not necessarily because of the underlying information, but because of how the state ratings are being calculated.
Hi. You've talked a lot today about transparency from the perspective of schools and districts and so on. But I can't help but wonder about yourselves, because to a certain degree, I think you present this process as sort of just reflecting what's going on. But on the other hand, by making decisions about what to include and what not to include, you are actually making or driving, to a certain degree, what's important in education policy. So I guess I just wanted to hear from you all sort of what that process is of deciding, on your methodology, to what extent your own philosophies about what's important in education drive that, or what other folks think is important in education policy.
Well, I'll take you back how the idea for this whole thing came about. I was living in North Carolina, and every year the newspaper would publish the test score results for every public school. And right next door to those test score results, in the next column over, they put down the percent of students receiving free reduced lunch. And they published these numbers every year because that they were in the business of selling newspapers, and the numbers sold newspapers. But what I noticed was that you could really predict what the results in the first column were going to look like just by looking at the results in the second column. And the Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina has a lot of really prosperous areas, a lot of very affluent schools, and a lot of high poverty schools. And I was realizing that such a big determinant of how these schools perform is just the characteristics of the students who walk in the door. And I said, given that there are so many parents who are going to be looking at this newspaper today and judging the schools on the first column, ignoring the second column, wouldn't it be nice to develop something where there was an adjustment factor that went in there that said, okay, judge this school not on the basis of where the kids are, but how far the kids have come. And that's really the motivation there. In a perfect world, we'd have the kind of data collection that would enable you to track this progress over time, but not every state collects that. So the degree of opacity here in the process is when we created this site, we made some decisions about just exactly how much of a correction factor should be applied here. But that was a research-based decision. Maintaining the accessibility of the site meant that we had to, you're not going to necessarily look at this website and find the regression and the R-squared and all the stuff that went into this. So we do gloss over that a little bit on the site, although the documentation is all available. It was really a philosophy of this: people are putting this information out there. It is mandated that this information be reported. Is there a way that we can steer parents towards using this information more intelligently and in a way that gives proper credit to schools that accomplish very good things with the students that they serve?
And I would just add to that, for the Bush Institute, I wish there was so much data out there that we could actually influence, which test scores we used and how many and which international scores, and we had much better or many more cities using TUDA data. So from the data perspective, I think we're all limited really by what's available and what's comparable. But for the Bush Institute, we also wanted to go a step further because we believe in the competitiveness of our students. and wanted to be able to show how schools did in comparison with the OECD schools. And so we did not have another subset of competitive schools that would include the Koreas and the Finlands to compare to. So we came up with this idea, and then it was really bound by what data was available. We too have all the methodology that, happy to send to you for all the regressions and how we average and normalize.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
Quick one.
Okay, quick one. One of the unintended consequences, I think, of when No Child Left Behind was first rolled out, and I happened to be in the Rose Garden with the president when that happened, which was really cool. But what happened afterward was that the testing began driving the curriculum. And so, and I know that your problem that you have is that data collection from across the country, math and reading are the only things that are consistently gathered, but that, and it's kind of was the concern you brought up, is that testing, the focus on testing, if that's what a school is being measured by, will, in the past, has driven out other subject areas. So I work with the Giller-Lehrman Institute of American History, and so history being what we look at, it has been compromised in so many systems because it wasn't a tested subject area. And is there any attention to subject areas, the arts, humanities, even science, a measurement that could be calculated in some fashion so that it would be accountable, not just in reading and math?
I think that the challenge with a common denominator approach like what we're using with the uniform methodology is that there are some states that do testing in many other subjects besides reading and math. It's not incorporated into our site, but I know that if you look at grade schools, for example, the test information on these other subjects is available. So if you are a parent who cares a lot about history, social studies, science, and that you're living in a state that collects the data, there are ways for you to access the data. But your general point, which is that if whatever you put the incentives on, you're going to get more of that. There's a certain scenario where that's not a problem, right? So if you're testing the right things and it leads people to learn the right things, well, it's okay. But it really does suggest that you want to be careful about making these decisions, and especially as we go into a period of potential reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, thinking about what is it that creates the career, college readiness, whatever you want to call it. We need to be promoting that. When my kids were in preschool, one of the sheets that they brought home was fill in this bubble with the number 2 pencil. They were just practicing for what they'd have to do someday. That part of it, it's hard to say that that's what a competitive workforce needs, is that sort of. But it really points to the key issue of designing the tests if the tests are going to drive the curriculum.
Well, and can I add just one statement to that? I mean, I think it's a matter of degree and not whether you should do it or not. I don't know that anybody in this room would argue that literacy and numeracy aren't important and aren't important for elementary grades, and that measuring how well we prepare kids in those subjects is not important. And so, I mean, certainly we should care about other subjects. What we do here is use the information that is available to have a good presentation of how well kids are being prepared in those core subjects. And I think that it's up to other people to say that we should measure more science in middle school or otherwise. I care about those things as well. I also care about important subjects being measured well.
As you mentioned, all broader subjects beyond math and English are published on grade schools. But I think we should all, as a field, be thinking about what is the next frontier in accountability, and not just accountability in terms of a series of rewards and penalties that come down from states and districts, but real accountability that is more relevant for parents. So let's think about, are there ways where we could share typical work products that you could expect from students at a certain school, and to be able to crowdsource that, to be able to share This is the kind of rigor that you could expect, the type of work students to be producing at the school on a broad range of subjects. I think the challenge is how can we do that in a quality way that has validity and scalability. But there are a lot of interesting, exciting ideas that push us to the next phase of accountability, I think, and we think more broadly about not just accountability, meaning sort of in the halls of states and legislatures, but in the halls of schools, and in the conversations that parents have with their teachers and their principals, and really kind of this idea of rigor that goes beyond test scores. So I think there's a lot of ideas that are certainly part of the next frontier. The kinds of tools we have are getting us farther and farther, but there's a lot more to go.
That's a nice note to end on. Please check out the Bush Institute's global report card, Grade Schools, and SchoolGrades.org. There's a lot of cool features on there, including a spotlight on America's Best Schools page where we profile the top schools in each state. And New York City, like as Jake and Josh said, really comes across very well according to our methodology. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you very much for coming.